Buckhead, Atlanta, 3 a.m. Outside the Red Martini Lounge, the neon lights reflect off the hoods of idling luxury cars. But the air is thick with a different kind of electricity. In the chaos of a closing-time crowd, a woman is being violently shoved and punched. Most bystanders look away, but one woman steps forward. She isn't just a passerby. She's a person who has spent her career weighing the scales of justice from a mahogany bench. She is Judge Christina Peterson. But in the next 60 seconds, the woman who spent years signing arrest warrants is about to find out exactly what it feels like to have the cold steel of handcuffs click around her own wrists. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The evening of June 20th, 2024, began like many others in Atlanta's high-end nightlife district. By the early hours of June 21st, the scene outside the Red Martini transformed into a chaotic theater of violence. According to Peterson's subsequent $50 million legal filing, she stood as a witness to a brutal assault. She claims she saw a man, an unidentified assailant, violently attacking a woman, throwing her backward and striking her repeatedly in the face. In Peterson's version of the story, she wasn't an aggressor. She was a good Samaritan, a protector of the peace who saw a victim in need and felt a moral obligation to intervene where others remained silent. She describes her actions as minimal, grasping the back of an assailant's shirt just long enough to interrupt the assault. She claims she saw the victim being unlawfully seized by another male and verbally commanded him to let her go. This is the image Peterson wants the world to see. A judge upholding the law even when off the clock. She would later state in her official complaint that she remained separate from the assailant and did not engage in the altercation beyond trying to stop the violence. But the Atlanta Police Department's narrative, backed by the initial arrival of Officer Keith Wadsworth, paints a drastically different picture. Wadsworth, an officer whose history would later become a focal point of the lawsuit, arrived to a scene of pure kinetic energy. He didn't see a hero, he saw an interference. The body camera footage begins not with a calm explanation, but with a swirl of motion, shouting, and the heavy breathing of officers trying to exert control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling. In the heat of the scuffle, an allegation is leveled that changes the trajectory of Peterson's life forever. The accusation that she punched a police officer in the head. In the footage, the sudden shift from a street brawl to a police detention is instantaneous. "Let go! Let her go!" Voices scream. Then, the sound of a struggle, a thud, and the frantic realization from the crowd that the woman being taken to the pavement isn't just anyone. "The judge just punched the cop," a voice rings out. Peterson is pinned. The pavement is cold against her face. She is no longer Your Honor. She is a suspect in a felony obstruction case. As the officer secures the cuffs, Peterson's defense begins immediately. She denies the strike, claiming her movements were only to assist the victim of the initial assault. Yet the officer remains firm. He doesn't ask for her credentials. He doesn't care about her status in Douglas County. He sees a woman who interfered with his attempt to secure a scene. The legal weight of this moment cannot be overstated. Under Georgia law, simple battery, OCGA section May 16, 23, involves intentionally making physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature. Felony obstruction, OCGA section October 16, 24, however, is a far more serious charge, carrying a prison sentence of 1 to 5 years. It requires proof that the defendant offered or did violence to the person of the officer. By making this arrest, Wadsworth was setting the stage for a legal battle that would eventually question the very foundations of probable cause. As Peterson is hoisted up, she is disoriented. She claims her purse, containing her identification, was on her shoulder before she was seized. When she was knocked to the ground, it fell nearby. She alleges that Wadsworth refused to let her friends retrieve it or let her identify herself properly. To the officers, she was just another uncooperative subject at 3 a.m. To Peterson, she was a constitutional officer being subjected to a seizure without a shred of evidence. She describes the physical force as excessive, a slam that sent her headfirst toward the concrete. In her lawsuit, she meticulously notes that at the time of this force, Wadsworth had no personal knowledge of the altercation, and had conducted no investigation. This is the core of her Fourth Amendment argument, that the police acted on impulse rather than information. As she is led toward the patrol car, the transition is jarring. Behind her, the red martini continues to glow with neon lights, but ahead of her lies a cage of plexiglass and steel. She is placed in the back of the cruiser, the door slams shut, and the high-status life she spent years building begins to fracture in real time. She is now isolated, separated from her friends and the victim she claims to have been saving. The interior of the patrol car is cramped, smelling of upholstery cleaner and old sweat. Peterson is now a prisoner of the state she used to represent. She begins to realize that her words, which usually carried the weight of law in a courtroom, now carry the weight of evidence in a criminal file. She is asked repeatedly for her name, but she remains defiant, choosing instead to challenge the officer's authority and his memory of the events. "You beat on that woman," she says from the back seat, her voice rising in pitch. The camera tell everything. She is leaning on the very technology that the city would later use to portray her as a villain. She is convinced the footage will vindicate her, while the officer is equally convinced it will convict her. It is a stalemate of perspective, filmed in high-definition infrared. But as the patrol car pulls away from the curb and begins its journey through the dark streets of Atlanta, Peterson isn't silent. She begins to speak, and the words coming out of her mouth aren't just legal defenses. They are a haunting warning that will soon go viral. Sitting in the darkened back seat of the cruiser, Christina Peterson leans forward, the light of passing street lamps flickering across her face, and utters a sentence that would leave investigators chilled. "The last person to ever try me like this died 30 days later. I pray for you." For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. As the patrol car pulls away from the glittering neon chaos of the red martini, the transition from the humid Atlanta night to the sterile, claustrophobic confines of the police cruiser marks the beginning of a 5-hour psychological ordeal. For Christina Peterson, the back seat isn't just a place of detention. It's a crucible where her identity as a legal professional is dismantled, piece by piece. Inside the car, the air is thick with the scent of ozone and old upholstery, and the only sound is the rhythmic crackle of the police radio, a stark contrast to the pounding bass she just left behind. Peterson does not sit in silence. Instead, she leans into a persona that is part defense attorney, part spiritual warrior. According to her $50 million lawsuit, this transport was not a standard administrative procedure, but a pretextual and punitive detention. She alleges that Officer Keith Wadsworth did not take her directly to the Fulton County Jail. Instead, she claims he drove erratically through the streets of Atlanta, stopping at undisclosed locations and exiting the vehicle multiple times to make private phone calls while she remained handcuffed and vulnerable in the back. To Peterson, this wasn't an officer conducting an investigation. It was a state actor exerting raw power over a woman who had dared to challenge him. In the recorded body cam footage, Peterson's reaction to her confinement is visceral. She begins to invoke the divine, transforming the arrest into a cosmic struggle between good and evil. "Lord, he has been touched by a devil and the demonic spirit," she cries out. Her prayers are loud, rhythmic, and directed squarely at Wadsworth. "In the name of Jesus," she continues, "Lord, that he has put his hands upon me." This spiritual rhetoric serves as both a coping mechanism and a rhetorical weapon. By framing the officer as touched by a devil, she is stripping him of his legal authority and recategorizing him as a moral transgressor. But the officer is also building a case. From the front seat, Wadsworth maintains a stoic, almost dismissive demeanor that further inflames Peterson's indignation. At one point, he challenges her memory of the scuffle outside the club. "Maybe if you wasn't drinking right now, you would have known that I walked over there to separate it," she fires back. Wadsworth's response is a direct jab at her credibility. "I think you had too much to drink because you can't remember what happened." This back and forth isn't just an argument. It's a battle over the official narrative that will eventually be scrutinized by a jury. Peterson's legal mind remains sharp even through the haze of the night's trauma. She repeatedly uses specific legal terminology: false imprisonment, malicious prosecution, 1983 claim to let the officers know she is not a standard arrestee. She is signaling that she understands the Fourth Amendment better than they do. She argues that because Wadsworth did not observe her commit a crime and did not interview the victim she was allegedly protecting, he had no probable cause to seize her. In Georgia, probable cause, OCGA section May 17, 30, is the bedrock of a lawful arrest. Without it, the entire legal structure of the evening collapses. One of the most telling moments in the car is her repeated demand for the officers to call Cyrus Colley. She identifies him as a supervisor within the Atlanta Police Department, a man who knows her character and her status. This name-dropping is a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between her current reality as a detainee and her former reality as a judge. When the officers claim they don't know who Colley is, Peterson's frustration boils over. She sees it as a deliberate act of disrespect, a refusal to acknowledge the professional courtesy usually extended to members of the judiciary. The physical reality of the handcuffs also becomes a central theme of her later complaint. She describes the pain of the restraints and the compressive force used during the initial takedown. She claims that while she was prone on the pavement, Wadsworth applied pressure to her neck and back, a detail that intentionally evokes the imagery of high-profile civil rights cases. For a woman who spent her career in a courtroom where due process was a theoretical concept she administered, the physical lack of it in the back of a patrol car is a profound shock to the system. As the cruiser navigates toward the precinct, Peterson makes the comment that would later echo across the internet. "The last person to ever try me like this died 30 days later." She follows this up with "I pray for you," a phrase that complicates the intent behind the words. To a prosecutor, this is a veiled threat, evidence of a felony obstruction by way of intimidation. To Peterson, it is a spiritual warning about the consequences of attacking a woman of God. This single sentence encapsulates the entire conflict. Is she a dangerous aggressor using her influence to threaten an officer? Or is she a prophet-like figure warning a demonic force of its impending judgment? The lawsuit filed by Peterson later details that her identification was in her purse, which remained on her shoulder until the moment of the violent slam. She alleges that the officers intentionally ignored her ID to prolong her detention and prevent her from being recognized as a judge. This, she argues, was a violation of the 14th Amendment's guarantee of due process. She wasn't just being arrested. She was being disappeared for several hours in a legal limbo where her name and title didn't exist. By the time the car finally arrives at the intake facility, the sun is not yet up, but the world as Christina Peterson knew it has already ended. The transition from the patrol car to the booking desk is the final step in her transformation. She is no longer the arbiter of the law. She is the subject of its most bureaucratic and dehumanizing processes. As the heavy doors of the processing center swing open, Peterson is met with the cold, fluorescent reality of the booking desk. When the officers demand she provide her name to begin the formal intake, she makes a final, defiant stand. She looks at the officer who claimed she punched him and delivers a searing indictment of his character, leading to a confrontation that would make her Good Samaritan defense nearly impossible for the city to ignore. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The morning light of June 21, 2024, did not bring clarity for Christina Peterson. It brought a cold, fluorescent reality. As she stood before cameras for a press conference just hours after her release, the physical and emotional toll of the night was visible. Flanked by her attorney and Alexandria Love, the woman Peterson claims she was protecting, she wiped away tears. For a moment, the narrative was centered on heroism. Love testified to the cameras that Peterson was the only person who stepped in while a man was viciously attacking her. She didn't mean to hit the officer, Love stated, framing the contact as a tragic accident born of a chaotic rescue attempt. But while Peterson was fighting the Atlanta Police Department in the court of public opinion, a much more powerful court was finishing a years-long autopsy of her career. Just 4 days after the Red Martini arrest, on June 25, 2024, the Georgia Supreme Court released a 45-page opinion that would change the course of Georgia legal history. It was a document that stripped Peterson of her title, her robes, and her future on the bench. The public often assumes the nightclub arrest was the cause of her removal, But the truth is far more complex. The Georgia Supreme Court made it explicitly clear. Their decision had nothing to do with the nightclub brawl. Instead, they were ruling on a pattern of misconduct that had been meticulously documented by the Judicial Qualifications Commission, JQC, since 2021. Peterson wasn't just losing her job over one bad night. She was being removed for what the court called a flagrant disregard for the law and willful misconduct in office. The specifics of these charges paint a picture of a judge who often treated the bench like a personal throne rather than a public trust. One of the most damning counts involved a woman named Vilma Arrington. Arrington had come to Peterson's court to correct a simple mistake on a marriage license. Instead of a routine administrative fix, Arrington found herself in a nightmare. Peterson summarily held her in criminal contempt without a hearing, without a lawyer, and without due process. She sentenced the woman to 20 days in jail, the maximum allowable, simply for what Peterson deemed false information. The Supreme Court found that Peterson had predetermined the guilt of this litigant and denied her the most basic constitutional protections. The ethics panel also delved into Peterson's misuse of courthouse resources and staff. The court records revealed that Peterson had a habit of using the courthouse's panic button to summon deputies for non-emergencies, such as when she wanted help moving furniture or was upset with staff. She was accused of pressuring sheriff's deputies to give her after-hours access to the courthouse for personal reasons, including hosting a wedding for civilians at 3 a.m. without proper security screenings. When a captain challenged her on these security breaches, Peterson's response was recorded in an email that would later haunt her. "Please retire as this county has outgrown your spirit." Her social media presence was another pillar of the misconduct case. Long before the nightclub arrest, Peterson's Instagram, under the handle Official Christinage, was a source of friction. She was accused of using the prestige of her office to promote black and educated BAE nightclub events at venues like the Rose Bar in Buckhead, the same neighborhood where she would eventually be arrested. The JQC argued that these posts detracted from the dignity of her office, blurring the line between a neutral arbiter of the law and a nightlife promoter. The Supreme Court's ruling was a professional execution. They didn't just suspend her. They removed her entirely and barred her from seeking or holding any judicial office in Georgia for a minimum of 7 years. The justices noted that her testimony during the ethics hearings was untruthful and underscored her conscious wrongdoing. To the court, she wasn't a victim of a system. She was a threat to the integrity of the judiciary itself. Despite the professional ruin, Peterson's legal battle with the city of Atlanta only intensified. While she was being ousted by the state's highest court, her criminal case for the nightclub arrest was taking a sharp turn. In a surprising development, the felony obstruction charges were eventually dropped. Records from late 2025 show that the prosecution transitioned the case to a single misdemeanor count of willful obstruction. Peterson seized on this, portraying the dismissal of the felony as proof that the original arrest was a setup and a malicious attempt to silence her. She filed her $50 million lawsuit in January 2026, representing herself. In the filing, she listed 9 counts, including stigma plus due process. This is a sophisticated legal claim arguing that the city of Atlanta didn't just arrest her. They used their power to publicly brand her as a violent felon by releasing curated and misleading body camera footage before she had a chance to defend herself. She claims the city affirmatively promoted a narrative that she was a drunk, violent official to justify Officer Wadsworth's use of force. The irony is profound. A woman removed from the bench for denying due process to others was now suing the government for denying due process to her. She claims that after the felony charges were dismissed, the city refused to issue a correction or disclaimer, leaving the stigmatizing footage to circulate forever on the internet. As the civil suit moved toward the discovery phase, Peterson made a move that shocked the legal community. Instead of hiding from the scandal, she leaned into it, using her newfound civil rights activist persona to challenge the very foundation of how the city of Atlanta trains its officers. She began digging into Officer Wadsworth's past, claiming she had found a documented pattern of unconstitutional behavior that the city had ignored, a revelation that threatened to bring the entire Atlanta Police Department into the crosshairs of her $50 million reckoning. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. By January 2026, the courtroom where Christina Peterson once presided as a judge has been replaced by the federal gallery where she now stands as a plaintiff. Representing herself pro se, she has filed a 23-page federal complaint that is more than just a demand for money. It is a meticulously drafted indictment of the city that she claims publicly branded her a criminal before she could ever mount a defense. But as Peterson moves forward with her $50 million claim, she is facing the most difficult obstacle in the American legal system, the Monell hurdle. To win against the city of Atlanta, Peterson cannot simply prove that Officer Keith Wadsworth made a mistake. Under the Supreme Court precedent of Monell versus Department of Social Services, a city is not liable just because its employee did something wrong. Peterson must prove that her rights were violated because of an official policy or custom of the Atlanta Police Department. Her legal strategy focuses on a failure to train and supervise. She alleges that the city had actual notice of a pattern of unconstitutional behavior by Officer Wadsworth. Her research into Wadsworth's past uncovered a 2020 lawsuit, Tolston versus City of Atlanta, which mirrored her own allegations. In that case, Wadsworth was accused of using a leg sweep and tackling a man during a festival, causing head injuries, although an internal affairs investigation in that instance did not find him in violation of use of force policies. It did find he violated procedures regarding his body-worn camera. Peterson argues that by failing to discipline or retrain Wadsworth after such incidents, the city of Atlanta effectively ratified his violent methods, making them responsible for what happened to her outside the Red Martini. The city's defense, however, is anchored in the qualified immunity doctrine. They argue that Wadsworth's decision to use force was objectively reasonable in the split-second chaos of a 3 a.m. brawl where he believed he was being struck. Furthermore, they contend that the release of the body camera footage was not a malicious curation, but a standard response to Georgia's Open Records Act. They argue that the public has a First Amendment right to see how their officers interact with public officials, especially when those officials are accused of interfering with an arrest. The stigma plus claim in her lawsuit is perhaps the most modern aspect of this case. Peterson argues that the city violated her 14th Amendment due process rights by disseminating the footage in a way that altered her legal status and professional standing. She points to the fact that the initial felony charges, which accused her of striking a cop with a closed fist, were eventually downgraded by Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis to a single misdemeanor of willful obstruction. Because the felony terminated in her favor, Peterson argues the city's continued hosting of the violent felon narrative is a form of ongoing state-sponsored defamation. As the civil case grinds toward a potential jury trial, the legacy of Christina Peterson remains deeply polarized. To her supporters and the woman she rescued, Alexandria Love, Peterson is a martyr. A woman of color who held a position of power and was set up and hunted by a system that couldn't handle her defiance. They see the $50 million lawsuit as a necessary redemption for a woman who lost her career while trying to do the right thing. To her critics and the Georgia Supreme Court, the legacy is one of moral obliquity. They look at the 30 counts of judicial misconduct, the jailing of innocent citizens without due process, and the untruthful testimony during her ethics hearings, and see a woman who was unfit for the bench long before she ever stepped foot in the Red Martini. They argue that the nightclub arrest was not a setup, but an inevitable collision between her personal nightlife persona and the professional judicial persona she had already compromised. The ultimate irony of the Peterson case lies in the very due process she is now fighting for. The woman who was removed from office for denying a litigant a fair hearing is now relying on the sanctity of the federal court to ensure she receives one. Whether she walks away with a multi-million-dollar settlement or a dismissed complaint, her story serves as a stark reminder that in the era of viral body cams and social media redemption, the truth is often buried under layers of curated narratives. As she waits for her next hearing in March 2026, Peterson continues to use her platform to advocate for justice for all. She has transitioned from the person who hands down sentences to the person who challenges them. In the end, the woman who warned that the last person who tried her died 30 days later is finding that her own 30-day window of judgment lasted years, and the final verdict on her character is still being written in the halls of federal court. The gavel has fallen on her judicial career, but the jury is still out on her legacy. As Peterson prepares for her criminal obstruction trial, the $50 million question remains. Was she a judge who broke the law, or a citizen who was broken by the law? And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every story is told with facts, clarity, and respect for the people affected. If you want to see more fact-based true crime stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.